Railroad ties have been used across the country for decades, but what many people don't realize is that they were often treated with a toxic chemical called creosote. That chemical can seep into the surrounding soil, water, and air, sometimes exposing nearby communities for years without them ever knowing. In this video, we'll explain what creosote is, how exposure happens, and what health risks have been linked to living or working near contaminated railroad sites. If you or your family may have been affected, we'll also cover what legal options could be available and how to find out if you may qualify for a claim. Creosote-treated wood in the railroad industry. Creosote is a chemical used for decades to preserve railroad ties, utility poles, and other wood products, but it comes with serious health risks. Railroad workers handling these materials can be exposed through skin contact or ingestion, leading to burns, irritation, and long-term health effects, including cancer. The coal tar creosote used in rail operations is especially hazardous and has also been linked to soil and groundwater contamination, extending risks beyond the workplace into nearby communities. For workers with repeated exposure, these risks can form the basis of legal claims aimed at holding responsible parties accountable. How are railroad workers exposed to creosote? Railroad workers are exposed to creosote at multiple stages of the job, not just during initial treatment, but throughout the life of the materials. Exposure commonly happens during installation, maintenance, and removal of treated railroad ties and timbers, where workers may come into contact with creosote through skin contact, vapors, or contaminated dust. The chemical can linger on tools, clothing, and surfaces, leading to repeated exposure over time, especially for workers regularly handling treated materials. Common exposure routes for railroad personnel include direct contact, skin, handling wet or freshly treated ties, leaks from bundles, splashes during drilling or cutting, and contact with tie plates or fasteners contaminated with residue, well-known causes of dermatitis and severe irritation. Inhalation, vapors or particulates, breathing PAH-bearing fumes from warm ties, contaminated ballast dust, or smoke from hot work and incidental burning. Ingestion, hand to mouth, eating or drinking without washing after handling treated wood, eating food after exposure, or storing food in contaminated cabs or crew sheds. Secondary pathways, environmental, runoff and leaching into soil and groundwater near yards or treating sites, potentially leading to drinking water contaminated in adjacent communities. Health problems linked to creosote exposure. Creosote exposure can cause serious health effects, especially with repeated contact. Short-term exposure may lead to skin irritation, burns, and eye damage, while high levels can impact the nervous system and internal organs. Long-term exposure has been linked to increased cancer risk, particularly skin-related cancers in workers with prolonged contact. Even at lower levels, ongoing exposure can still pose health risks over time. Potential health effects of creosote exposure include rash or severe irritation of the skin, chemical burns after prolonged or high-concentration contact, photosensitivity, skin more prone to blistering or burning in sunlight, tar acne or chronic skin lesions from repeated contact, increased risk of skin cancer and scrotal cancer from long-term exposure, liver problems, including toxicity and impaired function, kidney problems from chronic exposure to toxic chemicals, respiratory irritation, coughing, throat pain, and bronchitis from inhalation, chronic lung damage and inflammation in creosote workers exposed to smoke or vapors, immune system suppression leading to higher susceptibility to infections, gastrointestinal distress, nausea, stomach pain, diarrhea from ingesting contaminated food or drinking water contaminated with creosote. Cardiovascular impacts, including irregular heart rhythm and blood pressure changes in some studies. Reproductive issues, including reduced fertility and adverse developmental effects in animal studies. Neurological symptoms such as headaches, dizziness, and fatigue after high exposure. Long-term effects, including cancers of the lung, esophagus, and stomach associated with PAHs in creosote. Jobs with the highest risk of creosote exposure. Some railroad jobs carry a much higher risk of creosote exposure, especially roles that involve handling, cutting, or replacing treated wood. Repeated contact with these materials, particularly without proper protection, can lead to both immediate irritation and long-term health risks. Jobs with the highest exposure risks include track maintenance crews frequently handle old ties, apply new creosote-treated ones, and may cut or saw through soaked wood. Bridge and structural teams, exposed when repairing or replacing creosote-treated timbers in trestles and bridges. Yard and disposal workers deal with stockpiles of discarded ties and timbers where creosote residues remain concentrated. Machinery operators risk exposure to creosote smoke or dust when equipment disturbs preserved wood during construction or demolition. Carpenters and timber specialists involved in cutting, shaping, or fitting creosote-treated wood, which can release toxic vapors and particulates. Can I file a lawsuit for creosote exposure? If you worked in the railroad industry and developed cancer or another serious illness, you may have the right to file a FELA lawsuit. Workers who regularly handled creosote-treated materials and were subsequently diagnosed with cancer or other serious injuries may qualify. These cases depend on proving both exposure and resulting illness, which is why early legal guidance is important. Gianaris Trial Lawyers has experience handling railroad toxic exposure claims and can help evaluate whether your situation may qualify for legal action. Contact us for a free, no-obligation legal consultation if you believe you may have a claim. What compensation can I get from an FELA claim? Each case is unique, so it is best to consult with an attorney to find out which damages you may be compensated for. Common types of damages in creosote exposure claims include medical expenses, hospital bills, specialist care, medications, and rehabilitation, lost wages and reduced earning capacity, income lost during treatment and long-term career impacts, pain and suffering, physical pain, emotional distress, and diminished quality of life, household and caregiving costs, assistance required due to illness or disability, wrongful death damages, funeral costs, and loss of support for surviving family members in fatal cases. Gianaris Trial Lawyers, Railroad Creosote Exposure Lawyers. Creosote exposure has left many railroad workers and their families facing illnesses that change the course of their lives. These are not isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern of harm tied to decades of unsafe wood preservation practices and inadequate protection for those on the job. Holding railroad companies accountable is not only about individual justice, but about making sure industries take responsibility for the toxic legacy of their operations. At Gianaris Trial Lawyers, we represent workers and community members who suffered injuries resulting from creosote exposure. If you or a loved one has been diagnosed with a serious illness after railroad work involving creosote, we want to hear your story. Contact us today for a free consultation or use the chat feature on this page to learn instantly whether you may qualify for a railroad creosote exposure lawsuit.